Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is David. Today I'm going to show you how to build this amazing dynamic cool admin dashboard using React.js. And when you look at this dashboard, it has been separated into different sections. On the left hand side we have this sidebar navigation, and on the top we have this header navigation with all of these buttons working. This is showing you how many warnings you get. This is showing you how many messages pending for you to reply, and this one is showing your personal avatar with all of those profile details, account setting, and login and logout. And on the left hand side, this sidebar navigation is entirely toggled, and you can click on the toggle button and you will see this one moves in and out, and that one got hidden, and the entire dashboard, the graph, and all the information parts gets expanded. So once the sidebar gets in, this one got shrink down automatically. So on the sidebar, all the navigation items are also clickable with all the details in the sub navigation hidden, and this one allows the user to fetch different features of the dashboard. And in the body of the dashboard, it will say that this one has been designed for the sales company to show the most recent sales information or the product details with the revenue and the customized customer information. And you can see that we have the sales number summarized, the revenue and the customer. And this one we're allowed to change this one from this month to today or this year. And once you click on the relevant button, and the information, the data here changes automatically. And also down below we have this line graph. So if you refresh the page, you will see this loading effect of the line graph. And in this project, I'm going to show you how to load data using different kind of a chart third-party libraries. So what we're going to introduce in this project, including Apex chart and eCharts. But basically, for React project or JavaScript project, there are three options for user to do charts. There are chart.js, Apex charts, and eCharts. But in this project, we're only going to touch upon the last two, and which allow you to achieve all of these different dynamic graphs, which is really, really amazing. And down below it, we have this recent sales table. I'm also going to show you how to build a dynamic table inside admin dashboard with all of this information fetched from the backend API. As you can see, this is the backend URL that I have built for you. It has been built with a JSON server, so we can access and retrieve all the data from the JSON file, and then got those data rendered into a different format of the UI on the front end. So this one, we're showing the recent sales, which one has been approved, which one has been pending, and which one has been rejected. And down below, in another table, will allow you to see the top selling, in which we give the preview of the product name, and the price, and how many items has been sold, what's the total revenue that has been made. All right. So, and in each table, the user is allowed to click on this dot button to change the frequency of it. So even though the data is not moving, but in the real world, ideally, whenever the user clicks on a new button, they're supposed to send a new request to the backend URL, and the data down below should be changing accordingly. And on the right hand side, we have this recent activity showing by order of time, and also we have this budget report, which is also a new type of graph that is built with eCharts. So with the different angles showing that which part of the cost has been incurred the most inside the organization, so you can better prepare for all the budgets and be aware of the issue of your cost. And down here we have a circle bar that shows the website traffic, and that will allow you to be aware of which proportion of the traffic that comes from and takes the most of the organization energy. And last but not least, I have built a news and updates section that will give the user of the dashboard to see what's the most updated news happening around, and so they can update themselves every now and then. And this one is also, you are allowed to change the frequency of this month, today, and this year. And the last bit is just the footer that shows the copyright and all the things. So this back to top button is amazing, because once you scroll down, maybe you have more table to build in the future, but doesn't matter how far you go down the bottom, once you click on it, it will take you back to the top. Alright, so this is the majority of our dashboard. But magically, if I turn on the mobile view and reload it, you'll see this one looks pretty cool and all dynamic and responsive, and on the mobile view as well. So with all these navigations working, and with all of these things is working as well, and it adjusts itself perfectly and in line with the size of the screen. That is because we are using a framework called Bootstrap 5. So in this project, we'll be relying on the Bootstrap 5 to achieve the responsive design. But if you look at it, it looks pretty decent and nice. So it doesn't matter if the users want to look at the dashboard on their computer or they want to look at it with a mobile phone, they all works all right. Okay, so take back to the top. Okay, that's pretty much the introduction of this project. and I'm going to show you all the fancy designs and the UIs and data fetchings of the dashboard. If you're excited about this project, please code along with me, subscribe to my channel, like it and share it. So let's go ahead and build it right now. So to quickly start off this project, what we're going to do is to open up the terminal on your computer, and then we're going to find the directory that you want to build this project in. I'm in my own directory, but you can navigate to any directory you want, just using cd, the directory name, and then you can find the directory you want. And once you get into your directory, you just type key in the code, create React app, oops, I missed the front part, npx, create React app. And then you just gotta type in your customized project name. The part before is a default key for you to build a React project, and the thing afterwards is your customized words. So I'm just gonna be saying this will be a admin dashboard. So once you have your own name, you just hit enter, and then it'll start off the building process for you. And this is probably gonna take a while. So once it's building the project, I'm just gonna pause the video. So once it's done, we'll come back to it. So now the project has been successfully built under your directory, and as has been indicated, the next step is to change directory into our project folder, and then we can start off that project. Let us do it now. cd means change directory, admin dashboard. That's our project directory. So now we are in the project directory. As you can see, this one has been changed. And now, instead of starting off the project from the external terminal, what I want to do is to open up this project in our code editor. I'm using Visual Studio Code, but you can use anything you want. To open up the project with Visual Studio Code, you just type code space period, and then you press enter. This will open up your project folder for you. Let me just expand it. Beautiful and nice. So now we are in the project folder. As you can see, a couple of things have been provided to us. The first one is the node module. This is the default third-party dependencies that has been used in this project. You don't have to concern too much about it. You just need to know that all the third-party dependencies have been installed and stored in this folder. That's all. And then the second folder is the public folder. This one is like the public directory that will load your web page, especially for you to look at is the index.html file. When you get into this file, you will see that it's like the typical boilerplate for the HTML files. You have the document, you have that head, and you have your body, and you have your header, everything. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to delete some unnecessary comments because these are useless and taking out a lot of place. So I'm going to delete all of these for the code to look nice and neat. And then what is left of for you is to see the entire head that contains the links and metadata. And in the body part is the very traditional HTML as how you learned initially. And it contains a non-script tag, so which is useless. I'm just going to delete that. And the important thing for you to look at is this div tag, which contains the ID root, because essentially the entire application that we write in JavaScript will be compiled into HTMLs and injected into this tag and loaded on the browser. So, but here with the title part, you can rename it. I'm just going to say React Admin Dashboard. So now we have our project title, change it to the thing we want. And if you want to put in more metadata or your keywords or description for search engine optimization, this is the place for you to touch on. But for this project, we're not able to focus those. But just letting you know that this is no different from the traditional HTML files that you learned before. All right, close this off. And then the next folder for us to focus on is the source folder, because inside here that contains everything that our application will be built upon, especially for the index.js files and also the app.js files. If you look at the index.js files, it actually contains the app component. This app component is this one, imported from the pure/app, which is this one. Okay. So everything inside this application will be wrapped inside this component, and then essentially this component will be wrapped here in the index.js file. The index.js file will be finally compiled into this index.html files and then inject into this ID root tag. So this is how the React work. Okay, so let's just now follow the instruction to start off this project on our browser to see if it works. So to start it off, we're just going to open up the terminal in your code editor. To open up the terminal in your code editor, you just need to press Control, you hold Control and backtick on your keyboard to start off this terminal, and then you just type in npm start, and then it'll start off your project. hopefully successfully on the browser. Yep, everything has been loaded correctly with the spinning React logo that has been provided by Natural. So these are all React project default settings. It comes in with the project, and we haven't touched any of those, so that's why it's there. And it pops up with one warning that tells you that we are missing one of those dependencies at bubble. So what I'm going to do is going to quickly install this one. So copy that, and then I'm going to open up the terminal and say npm I for install, and then just paste in that line of code. So this one will allow me to quickly install that one. So once it's done, so pretty much we have done that. Going back to the original terminal, it shows that to compile successfully. It tells you that your project is loading on localhost 3000. Everything has been working fine now. All right, so that's that. So just a very quick job to clean up the index file because we are not using these comments. Just remove them. This looks all okay, and close that off. Just a very good habit to look at is every component file comes together with a CSS file. So the index.js files is coming with the index.css file, and app.js file come with the app.css files. These are a very good design habits. So every component has its own CSS, so you can separate them out. Okay, so over here, instead of using the old way of writing that application, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this. And then so far, I'm just going to give you a h1 tag and says hello to see if this one is working. If it does, and on the browser, you will see, well, it looks pretty cool. We have the hello was there. That basically means that we can change this file. It is working active, all right? So because we are removing everything, we're not going to use this logo component to just remove that. And then in the app.js file, it has all of those default settings. But we are going to use our own CSS, so what I will do, I will delete all of these, save it, and have a look at the index.css files. It's the same. It has its default settings for the CSS, so we're not going to use any of those. So I'm going to delete all of that as well. So now, once this is gone, we're going back. You will see this one changes to the default, like the new Times New Roman font. But I'm going to put in our own default settings for the CSS. So some of the general one, the first part is going to import our font. So the font that we use in this project is the Roboto. So you can go to Google Font and find the Roboto font and place it right over here. And the other font is the Nuito. The Nuito font is also a Google font. You just search two of them, and then from the Google Font website, import those two font links and put it right over here. Okay, so that's the first thing first. And then the second thing we're going to do is going to be our general settings for our root. So what we're going to have is that we're going to enable the scroll behavior for the root as a smooth. So whenever the user is going to scroll the browser, it's going to move smoothly instead of jumping on and off. And we're going to set up the primary color, the secondary color, and also our background color for the project, which is a purple and light purple, that kind of thing. And for the body, the entire body, we're going to make sure that we have our font family set to that, and also we have the body default color set to that. We want the body default color to be this background color that we just set. And the next thing for us to set is the anchor tag. Whenever you're going to use an anchor tag in your project, you want to make sure your anchor tag take the color of the primary. So one way to do is that you write the text hash code here, or alternatively you can do as a variable and primary, the same thing, it will refer to this color that you have predefined in your root tag. And also same for the hover effect, instead of writing that one, that's the original one, okay? And we can also say variable secondary, and also that will refer to this secondary color that we define in the root, and also we remove all the text decoration, which is the underline for each anchor tag, okay? So next thing, for all the titles, from H1 to H6, we want to make sure we have the font family Nuito, and that looks much nicer. So once you've done that, you're going back, you will see this thing has changed a bit. And another thing we probably want to do is that we want to do a margin, set all the margins to the entire page to 0, and also padding to 0 as well, and the box sizing, border box. So once you've done that, you're going back, you will see this one touch totally to the left top corner instead of leaving the default margin and space. That will remove all the margin and space by default. So once we've done that, we are ready to move on to the next step. The next step is to install our dependencies for this project. If you want to know which project dependencies has been installed, you just want to take a look at the package.json file, open it up, you will see that this is all the dependencies that has been installed so far, but not complete. Okay, so to do a good project, we're gonna open up our terminal again, going to this one, because this is like a empty, just clear it off, like an empty terminal for us to run more installations. I'm going to install all the necessary dependency at once, and if we miss something later on, I'm gonna install again, but so far let's just install some of the necessary ones. npm installation. The first thing we're gonna install is the Bootstrap, because we are building a Bootstrap website, and then the next one we're probably gonna install the Bootstrap icon. Bootstrap icons. Once we've done that, and the next thing we want to do, let's see, we want to also use that remix icon. Remix icon. We've done that. So we're gonna have a few charts to do in this project. So let's just install that eCharts, and we have that eCharts installed. And we probably want to install the React hyphen Apex chart. That's the one. And just in case we're going to use it, I'm going to install that boxy icon as well, just in case we're going to use more. Let's see. Yeah, so far pretty much that's what I can think of. If we miss anything, I'm going to come back to install, but let's just install all of these dependencies as one go. That'll save you heaps of times in the setting part, because later on when you build, you forgot to install something and your code runs into error, or you come with a bug. You thought it's going to be your own default, your own error, but it ended up you forgot to install that dependency. Alright, so once you installed all of those, you will see this dependency list gets updated immediately with the new dependency name and version comes in, and you can just double check this is exactly the thing that you want. So once you make sure of that, close off your terminal, and then that's your package.json file gets updated. Alright, so we've done that, and then we're going to our application and start to officially build our project now. The first thing we're going to think about is that what we should build first. Okay, so think about the layout of the dashboard. We have our sidebar on the top, we have our sidebar on the left, we have our navigation on the top, and then we have our dashboard body in the middle, and we're going to make sure everything is responsive. So the first thing is going to think about the component. We're definitely going to have this header component, and that's going to be our first priority to build. So inside the source folder, not a public folder, we're going to build a few folders for us to store our necessary stuff. The first one is going to be our component folder. So now every component is going to be stored inside this folder. And the next folder I'm going to build is going to be a data folder, just in case that we have any static data to use, so we can save our data here. And just remember that it has to be the static data, means the data will not going to change. You can save it here. If it's dynamic data, you better fetch it from the backend API or some database and provide those data. Okay, and if you also have some static image, basically means that the image you're going to use it forever, not going to change. You can temporarily save it here, but if it's dynamic image, also retrieve it from the backend URL. Okay, so that's the 3 folders. And inside our component folder, we are going to build our first component, and that is the header. So it's a header with a capital letter, JS. That's going to create you a JavaScript file, but because we are building project specifically for React, so we are creating a JSX file. So the header.jsx, the name that we are doing the React project, and inside here, we're just going to create a boilerplate that is very similar to our app.js file, and with a functional component, with the import, and also with the export. So what we're going to do by saying rfce to create a boilerplate like that, we have a functional component with a header name, and then we export it by default down the bottom, exactly the same, right? You don't have this boilerplate shortcut. You just need to go into your installation and find this one. That's the ES7 React Redux React Native snippet, and you install this one, and you will have that shortcut the same as mine. Okay, so we're going back, close this off. So once you've done that, the next job is to create a matching CSS files and import it into the component file. So let's just say header.css. So it's the same name and it matches this one. So here we say import header.css. So once we've done that, this file has been linked to its component file, and anything you write inside this CSS file applies only to this component. All right, so that's for our header. And then to think about it, how do we show this header on our application? So far, if you're going back to the app, it also shows the hello. That is because we are saying hello here. Okay, so to show that header, we must import this exported header component into our app.js folder. So we're just gonna delete that, and then here we say header. Oops, header. So we're gonna check, do you want to import the component folder's header? Yep. So now close off that brackets. You will see the header has been imported over here. Now if you're going back to the browser, you will see the header text box is showing there at the very top corner. Okay, so that's how we do it. And the next thing for us to do is to do some basic settings for a project before we jump into the header. First, I'm going to import all of those icons that we have installed before, because we're going to use heaps of icons in this project. One is the Bootstrap icon. If you don't know how to apply the Bootstrap icon, just type in this line of code. This line of code allows you to import the remix icon, which is another one we have just installed. And to enable Bootstrap in this project, we have to do these two lines of setting. One is to enable the Bootstrap CSS. The other one is to enable the Bootstrap JS, the JavaScript part. And then we're going to use both in this project. All right. So once you've done that, it'll make things a lot easier later on. Okay. So let's go into the header component and to think about what we're going to build inside the header. We are going to have the logo. We are going to have the search bar. And also we are going to have our navigations inside our header. Right. So the first thing, we're going to wrap the things inside the header with a header tag. So we say header. And then we're going to give the ID of header. And then we're going to give a class name header as well. All right. So, and then we're going to make sure that the header is always sitting at the top and also a line item in the middle of the center of the screen. So we're going to use some default Bootstrap class. This is the Bootstrap class name. So once you've done that, the header will be attached to fixed to top, and then display flex, a line item in the center vertically. Okay, so we've done that. And if you're looking at, there's nothing happening so far. It's because we are missing typing out. Let's just say we type header here. Yeah, it's showing off. Basically means everything's working. The next thing is to build our logo. And instead of typing the logo straight away over here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a separate component called logo and import the logo over here. So what we're going to have inside the header we're going to have a logo. That is going to be our first thing. So I say logo. We're going to have that. And after logo, we're going to create our search bar, and then we're going to have our navigation. So create our structure first. So we will have our search bar, and our nav. So those are the three things we are going to build inside our header. Okay, so go back to our component folder, create a new file called logo.jsx, enter rfce to create a boilerplate, and very quickly to create another file called logo.css, enter. Going back, import.css files to link those two together. So once you've done that, we will pretty much have done our logo. So if you want to show the logo, you better just import it over here by saying logo, import it. So now you will have your logo here inside our header. So if you're going back, you will see the logos there. Okay, because the header only imports one component, which is logo, and the logo component only shows the text words logo. Okay, that's why you can see the logo text words on your browser. All right. So the next job is to finalize the logo building. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to quickly copy and paste the components file. Instead of typing that, we'll do this, and we have one component function. And I'll explain all the code for you. First thing, we create a div and give a Bootstrap display flex with all the alignment centralized, but justify between basically means that you want it to horizontally spread out. And then we create an anchor tag, which is used to load your brand name. The brand name of our project is called admin dashboard. But if you do have your brand image, you can put it over here. I commented out for you to do it on your own. If you do have your image, you can put it in here. And then we're gonna have a icon, which is the search bar icon, that will allow the user to toggle on and off the sidebar. And to enable the toggle off, we have to do a bit of a function, and that thing is an arrow function called handle toggle sidebar. Whenever the user click on the sidebar toggle button, the body will be add and remove the class name called toggle sidebar. This toggle sidebar allows the sidebar to be shown on and off. Okay, so that's the logic behind it. And this is the Bootstrap icon, by the way. So when you want to use a Bootstrap icon, the best thing to do is to go into the Bootstrap icon website. So once you get into this website, you will see all of these things, and you just need to find, say for example, the one that I used is called a menu, and then you'll find a list one. So you're just gonna copy this one to your clipboard and paste it somewhere. All right. So, but the thing is, when you copy and paste anything, it comes with a class. But in React, you have to rename it to class name. This is a default setting for class in React.js project. Okay. So we've done that. So now the logo is completed. If we're going back to the browser, you will see we have our logo there. I'm just gonna refresh it. Yeah, the logo's there, and also the toggle button's there. But it looks pretty ugly because we haven't done the CSS setting yet. So going to the logo.css, I'm going to copy and paste in all the relevant logo settings. So here we say give the bit of a certain width, and also make sure if you do have an image, I have defined the size of the image as well for it to look properly. And also we have defined the font size and color as well. Now you're going back, you will see it looks much better. Okay. So that's for the logo. And for the header, we also want to put in some CSS for the header as well, so it looks nicer. Copy and paste that. So for the entire header, we have the box shadow, we have the background color set to white, and also we give a bit of a padding. We make sure it stands out from the crowd, so give the really high number of the Z index, and also we defined the toggle sidebar button as well over here. And now you're going back, if you look at it, it looks much nicer. Even though you click on this button, it shows nothing. That is because we haven't built the sidebar yet. But we have the top header already with a few lines of code, which is pretty cool. All right. So our next job is to finalize the next part of the header, the search bar. And instead of writing the code here, I'm going to create a separate component for the search bar as well. So going to our component folder, create a new file called search bar, and the JSX. So enter RFCE to have our boilerplate ready. Close off those few files that we have finalized. And then very quickly inside the component, create a new file called searchbar.css. Enter. Just be careful when you create a CSS file. You better import it immediately, otherwise it's very easy to forget later on. So done that. The next job is going to build this component. Instead of typing all the things, I'm going to show you what I did. So we created a new class name called a search bar, and then inside the search bar is going to be a form, because essentially whenever the user search on something, it's going to be the submit action, submit events that will trigger a form submission, and then it'll search the entire database and pop back with the result. But even though within the project we're not going to show the entire search functionality, but I tell the logic behind it. That's why we're using a form, and inside the form is going to be the input that will allow the user to type in the keywords. And then also we have a button, which is a search button. So we've done that. And once we've done that, in the CSS part, we're just going to the copy and paste in my definition. So for the header search bar, we give them a minimum width and also the padding. On a different screen size, you probably make sure that its position and the paddings has been adjusted properly. All right. So for the search form, we want to make sure that it takes 100% of the width. For the input, we want to make sure the text has a certain color, and also give a beautiful border and some border radius as well. This is the input CSS effect on focus and on hover. And also we want to predefine the button, the search button as well. So once we have all of these things done, and we're going back to the header, we are ready to import our search bar component. Search bar, import it. So once you've done that, you're going back to the browser, you will see that bar is there. This is the button, which is the zoom in glasses. So we have everything ready. Okay, so that's our search bar, the second thing. The third thing is going to be our navigation, which is a large one, because the navigation contains our warning messages and our avatar parts. So it contains many stuff. So what I will do, we will build a component called nav, and then inside nav, we are going to build another few components. So instead of writing the entire thing on the same page, okay? So let's go into the component folder and build a new component called nav. JSX, enter. We're down the search bar, we close that off. RFCE, we've done that. And then very quickly, nav.css. Just gonna import that. Nav.css, we've done that. Okay, so we have our navigation done. Just trying to see if this one's working. We're gonna import our nav over here. So now we have our logo, search bar, and the navigation all imported into our header. So before we jump in to build the details of the navigation, we just want to see that yeah, the nav word is there, but we want this thing to be a warning, a message, and also an avatar path, and put it position over the right hand side at the far end. So what I will do, going back to the editor, in our nav component here, we're just gonna recreate the thing for our nav. So we'll create a nav tag and give a new class name for our nav. That's our new class name. And then inside our nav, we're gonna use a list to hold all the navigation stuff, like our notice, like our warning messages, and also the user's profile avatar. All right. So again, instead of writing the code straight away here, for each of those, I'm going to create a separate component. This is like the higher, more advanced way of thinking of building a web project. Instead of writing things on a single page, we're going to separate them out into different files, and each of them is called component. And they are isolated to each other, but they are allowed to be exported and imported and reused in another file or components. All right, that's the beauty of the React project. So a new component I'm going to create is going to called nav notice. This is going to be the notice for the user, JSX. So we have our nav notice here, and another one I'm going to create is going to call a nav message. And then this is going to be the how many messages you're going to get in our navigation. So we have two now. The last one is going to be nav avatar, which holds the user's profile and the avatar image. I have done and built. As you can see, I have put all the components together inside this folder without giving them any subfolders. It's up to you. If you want them to look more decent or even more clearer, you can create a subfolders to contain the subcomponent. Say for example, the navigation that contains three subcomponents like these three, you can put them into a separate folder called nav, so you can categorize them in a more detailed way. I'm just trying to make things easier in this project, but you can do it in your own way. It doesn't really matter. And the next thing for us to do is to import those few components that we just created over here. So we say nav notice, the first one, and then the next one we say a nav message. We have that one, and then we say nav avatar, the last one. So now we have those three stuff. We close this one and this one. Now we have this three stuff that we created all imported into our nav. And if we're going back to the browser, you will see those text words are there and all put it into the correct position. And the remaining thing for us to do is just to build these items and components inside these three separate components folder. All right. So the first thing is going to be nav notice, which is this one. Inside this nav notice component, what I will do, I delete this default one, copy and paste the one that I wrote, and explain it to you. All the things comes in as a list item, and with the class name of nav item. If you look at the structure of it, it comes in as a list item. And inside here, you will have this list that contains how many nodes you have, and the content of each also gets to shown here. We have this one. If you close those off, you will see the content of those subdividers. This is another item. You can close it off. With one divider, another item, you can close it off. Yeah. So that's the structure of it. So ideally, these data are supposed to be fetched from some kind of a backend URL, the API endpoint, and mapped over here. But we are building a static project for now. So instead of building a separate route, I just hard-coded all of those messages here. But in the real project, you can fetch the item, all the messages from the backend API, and map it here into a separate, even the sub component over here. All right. So once we've done that, if we go back to the browser, you will see that you have this thing listed all over here. It looks pretty ugly now, but once I put on the CSS, it will be a lot better. So now let's just go into nav, and then we're going to the nav.css. I copy and paste in all of this CSS file for the navigation. I just remove the list item, the list style, remove the padding, make sure the nav icon has the proper font size and color, and also predefine the image size, and also the font size and weight for our nav profile span. Make sure we have our badge number, which is this one, the badge number. We have given that a proper font size and the background color, all of these things. It's a very basic CSS settings. It's just a fetched class name and then give them a proper margin and font size. You will have the perfect alignment in the end. So I'm just going to quickly go through this. If you want to copy this CSS file, just pause the video and you can copy all of these. Yeah, so that's the end. Not much. Yeah. So once we've done that, just refresh. You can see these things that looks all good. That's that. All right, so we have our first navigation node is done. Close that off, and then we're going to the second one, which is the message. The second one is the message. The nav message component is a similar logic to the previous one, so I'm just going to copy and paste in mine. It also comes in as a nav item with all the list stuff. So inside this list stuff, it contains how many messages you got, and also each subcomponent will have the details of the list that tells you which message is from, the content of the message, and also how long ago, and also with a drop-down subdivider, and it comes in with the next message. So it's the same logic as before. So once we've done that, we're going back to the browser. You will see this one here with all of those stuff. That looks pretty nice. And then you will see the drop-down looks a bit of different from the original design. That's because some setting hasn't been added in yet, but we'll finalize it in the end. The last one is going to be our profile, which is this one, with the avatar and stuff. So going back here, for the avatar, it's the same. Delete this default setting, copy and paste in mine, and it's the same kind of logic. It's a nav atom drop-down with all of those profile images. So here what I'm going to do is that I'm going to import one profile image as a static image inside our image folder here. But in the real project, this image is supposed to be fetched from the backend URL. Because we are doing the demonstration purpose, so I'm going to import it here. So just import a sample image. And then I'm just going to say import that profile image from /images user. So now you have to import image as a variable and then fetch that variable here. If you write the URL directly into that image source, it won't work. This is the React way of handling the image source. All right. And the remaining thing is that you build a list which contains all the details, the user's name, the title, and also the different list item, my profile, account setting, all of those list items. If these data are fetched from the backend URL, or alternatively, if this name of the list item are static, you can create a JavaScript array inside the data folder and map those into those different separate components. Each component will be a list item. I didn't do so, it's just because it's too many type of works, but you can do it on your own as a practice, because after all, if you look at this list item, they look all the same. Here we're just repeating ourselves. It's because we only have few of them. Say for example, if you have a navigation that contains more than 10 of them is very, very tedious to hard code everything like this, and it's a lot of repeating. What you can do is that you create a separate file. I'll show you later on with one example. I'll show you later on, but I tell you that this can be done with a simple way. You create an array that contains all the list item objects, and you map that array into this different list item instead of hard coding them repetitively on and on and on. Alright, I'll show you later on with one example instead of doing all of them. So the remaining job for you to clean up your code and have the super dried program, it's up to you how you want to handle it. But so far we're good. We have all the stuff ready. And then if we're going back, you will see that our thing is there. So everything has now been built up. Just one thing to mention, if you have your file different from mine, and one last thing you probably want to adjust, I show you the code, is this one. We're going to have to override some Bootstrap default setting for the drop-down menu, because basically inside the navigation header, we have a lot of a drop-down menu here, and you just want to rewrite some of the Bootstrap default to make it look nicer. I'll just slowly scroll down these items for you to look at how we're going to rewrite some of the stuff. It's not many, but if you do all of these, it'll allow you to have the same kind of CSS effect as mine. Alright, that's the code. So now we're going back to our navigation. As you can see, the logic behind it is that we have our nav notice, nav message, and nav avatar, which are the three items listed on the far right, and we have our logo, the toggle button, the search bar on the left. This is the logic. Alright, and then just to quickly review that our logic is that we create a header component which contains the logo, the search bar, and the nav. In the nav component, it contains the nav notice, the nav message, and the nav avatar. And each of these are just what we build: the nav message, and also the nav notice, and also the nav avatar. Okay, so you can make them even smaller by creating sub child component. You just have to do a bit of more data mapping. And wrap this list item into a separate component as well. But I will show you later on when we come to the position with one very good example of how to do so. But for the remaining stuff, I'll just leave it to you to wrap them even further. Alright? So now, so far, we have finalized the building of our header navigation. Our next job is to put on the side menu and enable this toggle button so the side menu can be turned on and off. Alright. To build a sidebar, what we're going to do first is to inside the component folder, we create a new component, new file, and call it a sidebar.jsx, enter rfce to create a boilerplate, and then very quickly we're going to do sidebar.css to create a CSS file, and then we'll import it back. So these two are linking together. Sidebar.css. Alright, so now that one is done. And then to create a sidebar, the sidebar comes in two parts. The first part is going to be a heap of things with the drop-down menu, and the second part of the sidebar is just the click button on the navigation. So we have to do the same kind of arrangement as well. So to do so, what I'm going to do is to create using the Bootstrap tag. There's something called a side. We create something this to wrap up our sidebar, and also we're going to give the class name and the ID as well. So here we give the ID and make it equal to sidebar, and then give the class name and then make it equals to sidebar as well. So now we have this wrapper that wrap up our entire thing. And then the next thing is that we're going to create a list with the class name of sidebar -nav and then tab. So also give the ID of the same name, sidebar -nav. So now we have this thing set up. The remaining thing is just to put our sidebar list item inside this list wrapper. So there's a couple of items. There's two ways to do so. One is to do the hard coding. It's like how we design an application on a website in the traditional HTMLs. So I'm going to show you how we do that. So copy and paste in all of this list item. As you could see, with this list item, we're going back to the very top. So this is our first navigation item, and then with our dashboard, the keywords in it. Close that off. We have our second nav item with all of our documents, and then the documents contains the drop-down navigation as well, and with a few subcategories: customer, supplier, and the logistic. So these are template for the navigation are all supplied by Bootstrap. So the Bootstrap have the built-in sidebar navigation, so make things a lot easier for us. And you can follow the same structure to do the remaining things. For example, you can set another nav item for forms, and inside the forms we have our application form as a subcategory, release form, and cancellation form. And also our tables, we have our general table and data table. These are all comes in with a big category, and also the drop-down menu contains a subcategory, right? So that's going to be our sidebar. And if you look at the browser now, the sidebar is not showing anywhere. The reason is because we have to enable this one to be called or imported somewhere for it to appear on the browser. And the proper place to show that is this app.js file. So far, we only show the header. So what I'm going to do, I cut the header and give them an empty angle brackets. That empty angle brackets will serve as a wrapper that will wrap up all the components that you want to show on the browser, because for Reactor project, in the return path, only one big component is allowed to be returned. So we have to wrap the inside one single thing. And then the second one that we want to put is the sidebar. So we import that, and then we save it. And now if you're looking at this, you will see this all the drop downs is working. But the CSS isn't correct because we haven't defined it yet. But you can see that the thing we have set previously has now been shown up. So to make it look nicer, what I'm going to do is that inside this sidebar.css, I'm going to put on this CSS for it, so it looks all proper and nice. Paste. I will show you that I will have to make the sidebar position fixed, make a bit of a margin to the top, and also make sure it attaches to the left, attaches to the bottom, give a certain width of 300 pixels, make sure it stands out from the crowd, sitting on top of all the components. And also we'll do a bit of adjustment. When the screen size is different, we have to make sure this side navigation moves automatically. We're going to remove the scroll bar. And also the remaining stuff is just the adjustment for the sidebar on different screen size. So once we've done this, and we're going back to our page, you will see this thing works all good with all the proper fonts and also the proper font color, right? So, and now if you click on this toggle on button, you will see magically this sidebar got hidden, and then you click again, this one gets show up. The reason is because, remember when we designed a header, we have our logo, and inside our logo, we have this function. Whenever that toggle button gets clicked on, this function gets triggered, and that function allows the body to be toggled with a class name of toggle sidebar. With the toggle sidebar class name on, that toggle effects can happen. So if we're going back to the navigation, let me just browse it to see if I can find it. Yep. So you can see that with the toggle sidebar class name on, that sidebar actually have a left of 0, and then left minus 300 pixels. So this is how we control this. With this class name on and off, the sidebar have a different position to the left. It can be either 0 or minus 300 pixels. In this way, that sidebar gets hidden and show up. So once we click on this one, so far it's left, it has been positioned to left by 0, but if we click again, it has been minus 300 pixels. Minus 300 pixels is exactly the width of this sidebar. That's why it can been pushed to the left by minus 300 pixels and got hidden up. That's the logic behind it. Alright, so this is how we make it work. Soon as you have that done, we pretty much finalize this sidebar setting. With the help of Bootstrap, it's a lot easier to handle this, and we can save a lot of work, and this thing is working perfectly fine on the responsive screen, so you don't have to worry about those as well. And that's done. Another beauty thing that I want to show you is inside this sidebar over here. One way is to hard code all the things like this and showing them on the browser, but you can see that these are pretty repetitive stuff. The idea of using React to develop the website is to make your code dry. Basically means you do not repeat yourself. If you have a repeating component, that means that a component is reusable. You should wrap it up into a separate component and also map the data into that component so you can heaps of them. And the way to do that, I'm going to show you the second part of the navigation. Down the bottom, we're going to have a list of the nav item as well. Instead of hard coding them one by one and do a lot of repeating, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a navigation list data and then map that data into this kind of a nav item, something like that. This entire thing is repeatable, and we can map it into a separate component. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste in the static data called nav item into our data folder because it's static. And you can see that I designed this one in a JSON array, and in a JavaScript array that contains JavaScript object, and each of them have an ID for the object, and also have a name property and also an icon to be used. So once we have done that, you just export this file. First you create it, and then you export it to be able to use it. And then going back to the sidebar, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to import this one. Say for example, just right above, I would say import nav list from data nav item. Okay, so this is going to be our nav list. And then instead of mapping and instead of hard coding each of those nav item by writing heaps of lists, what I'm going to do here, just below this logistic, I'm going to map it into another one. So before that, I'm going to create a line called nav heading page, because we know that this is going to be a separate line over here. And then down below, I'm going to write a bit of a JavaScript. Just gonna map the data that we just created, and we say nav list map. Oops, it looks like I have put it into the wrong place. I caught this line. Oh, it looks like we still have heaps of items down here. It has to be finalizing all the above ones. Let's see how many we have. That's the first nav item, third one, fourth one, fifth one. As you can see, we got heaps of nav items. They're all repeating, but now I'm showing you the new way. First we create a new line here. So now we have a subtitle which separates the above parts and the parts down below. And then below that, what we can do is do a bit of mapping. And I will show you the difference to make you understand the beauty of using React. And then we're doing the JavaScript, the higher order array function. Map basically means that you can handle this data simultaneously all together at one time. So inside here, we say for each object inside the data array, what we want to do is that we want to map them into a nav list item. So that is going to be the list with a class name called nav item tab. So now we have that list, which is very similar to the one above, no different. And then for each one to be mapped, we're going to have to assign a key to it, and the key has to be unique, and we retrieve the property from that each individual object. Remember, in the mapping function, each individual object referring to each individual purple curly braces, right? So that refers to that. As you can see, each individual object has the underscore ID property. So we use that as an attribute to make sure that everything is unique to each other. And down here, what we're gonna do is we're gonna set up the structure of our nav list item. Basically, that's going to be the link and the anchor tag with a hyphen that will lead the user to another page. And also, we're gonna set up a font. It's like an icon, because we know that each of them have an icon. So now we can use this icon here. This is supposed to be the icon that we set very initially over here. It's gonna be the bootstrap icon, or we're gonna using the remix icon, either this one or this one. So going back, and we know that each navigation is supposed to have a name, so we access the name property, which is this one. Okay, so we are using these three properties from each object to finalize it. And now you can see we only write the list for once. Okay, we do not repeat ourselves by writing them so many times. If you want your code to be super clean, you can cut this one into a separate component and call it a nav item, and then you wrap it into the separate component and you put it over here as an import. That's absolutely okay. But since we have a small component, I want you to understand the structure of it. I didn't wrap it, but you can do so. Just say, for example, inside the component folder, we create a new file and call it nav item.jsx. So now enter RFCE, you create a boilerplate, And going back, you can see this one has been mapped into that. So we cut the entire thing, cut, and put it over here. Okay, as you can see, this one has been wrapped into the separate component. This is how you do so. But you would know that this one will have the access to the nav object, but we don't have it. And the way to do so is that we create a property for this child component, and we call it the nav. Over here, we do the object destructuring, and we're going to pass this property from the parents component, and the child component can access it. It's the same feature. All right. So now back here, what we're going to do, we're going to import the child component that we just created called the nav item. Import, close that angle brackets. So now you can see that each object inside that nav list array has been mapped into your nav item child component, and we know that we need a key for the assignment to make sure this one is unique, and also we want to pass that nav object as the property with the same name. So now the key has been passed in, so we do not need the key here. We only need the key when we do the mapping. Once we get in this one, the entire object, each individual object of the nav has been passed in as a property with the same name, and the child component access that object and can fetch the features or the property of each. It has the same result. And then we're going back to see, it has exactly the same result. Nothing changed. That will make your code super clean. As you can see, when you do the mapping on this page, if we do not show the front part, say for example, you only have 4 lines of code to do a mapping, and then the nav item has been wrapped into a separate component over here. And each file is super clean, super simple, super straightforward. Okay, this way is not the correct way to do so, but I leave it to you as a practice. You can also set up a data structure file, something like this, and then map them into the nav item. One of the challenges you're probably going to be facing is that this one has this sub drop-down menu, but you can design so by maybe doing some arrays or some new objects inside these objects. It's going to be a bit of more work, but it's definitely achievable. All right, so now we finalize this one, and our sidebar navigation is completed. Our next job is to create the main body of the dashboard. So let's just create a new component in the component folder. So give it a new file and name it the main.jsx, rfce to create a boilerplate, and then we're going to create a new CSS file with the same name, main.css. Going back to the body, import that / main.css. So now these two files are linked together. In this main body, we're going to create the body of the dashboard. Basically, it's the empty space on the browser. And just imagine what does this body of the dashboard contains. Firstly, it will contain a title page, a page title. So we'll create a separate component to run the page title, and then it comes the dashboard itself. So over here, instead of showing the main, what we're going to do, we're going to do 2 separate components as well. The first one is going to be the page title, JSX, rfce to create a boilerplate. And then also we're going to create a new file, page title.css, and then I'm going to import that. Done. Okay, so now we have that thing done, and just do a bit of editing to the main section. So what we're going to do here is going to create a main tag. Oops, not this one. We're going to create a HTML main tag like that. Delete this one and give the ID of the main and also the class name of main as well. So we have that done. And then we're going to import this page title first into this main. So what we're going to do here, page title, import it over here. And in the main CSS, what we're going to do is I'm going to do some basic editing to the CSS to give it a bit of a pre-definition of everything. Just make sure the main has a margin to top, otherwise it will be attached to the very beginning of the page, which overlays the header, and also give it a bit of proper padding, and also make sure that on the different screen size the padding changes accordingly. Right? So that thing is done. And If you look at the browser now, nothing's going to change. That is because we only created the main component, but we haven't got a chance to import it over here. So on app.js, what we're going to do is that we're going to import this main component, and then this main is here. And then if you look at that body again, you will see that page title is sitting at the right corner in the main body, not overlapping the header and not overlapping the sidebar. And you can see the sidebar works perfectly. If we shrink it or hide it, that thing moves automatically to the left. Okay, so everything works all right. So now just finalize the page title, and the page title is going to be a very simple component. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to copy and paste my design, give the brackets, and put it here. And we know that the page title is going to be the dashboard. And by the way, this thing can be a different way of doing so. Say for example, here we just want to say it's a dashboard page, and if we want to make the name of the page dynamic, what you can do here is that you can say, give the property called the page. Just say that we have a property, assume the property called the page, and here instead of typing in the dashboard, and what we can do is that we fetch the property of that page. So here the same as well, and then we say page. So now the page has been able to run the dynamic data based on the property that you send in. But how do we create that property for that page? Is that it has to be in the main. Here you create a page property, and if you want to give the a static data, say for example you want it to be dashboard, you just say that this page property equals to dashboard, and then if you look at that, the dashboard is there. Okay, everything works all fine. And for the page title CSS, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to give a bit of a setting. It's a very simple one. Make sure it has a margin to bottom, make sure the H1 has a proper size, and also the color changes accordingly. And then if you look at the back again, this thing shrinks down a bit and it looks much decent and smaller. Alright, so next time if you want to reuse this component, you don't have to touch anything on this page title component. You just say, maybe you want to say this is going to be another page. If you change the property value, and if you look at it, that thing changes to property value automatically. Alright, so this is how the React thing works. It allows you to create a component template and use that property to control the data dynamically. Okay, so we've done one part. The next part is going to be, close these two off, and the priority or the major focus of our project, which is the dashboard. So let's just create a new component in the component folder and call it the dashboard. JSX, enter, and then accordingly we're going to create a new file called dashboard CSS, enter. So now we have these two working all together on each other. And then the dashboard JSX, just say RFCE to create a boilerplate. And then we're going to run heaps of things inside this dashboard component, because we're going to do data fetching here, and we're going to map those data into our different area or different section inside the dashboard, including graphs, cards, all the lists and the tables, and also the news, everything. Okay, there's a heaps of things to be done inside this dashboard. So firstly, let's set up a structure for the dashboard instead of typing this dashboard word here. And let's just say that we're going to have a section, and give the section the class name of dashboard. Enter. And also we probably want to give a second class name of section, because we do have some general settings for it. And then inside here, we're just basically now going to do a testing to see if it works, like so. And then in the main part, we're going to import that dashboard. So now the dashboard has comes in, and if you look at the browser, you will see that dashboard is there. So everything works fine now. And we're going back to our editor. Instead of hard coding that one, what we're going to do, we're going to use the Bootstrap template to run this thing. So we're going to create a row. Oopsie. A row. And then inside the row, we're going to divide a section into different sections. And on the left hand side, it's probably going to take the majority area of that dashboard. And on the right hand side, it's going to take the margin area of that dashboard. So the way the Bootstrap works is that for each row inside the Bootstrap, it contains 12 columns in total. How wide you want your area to be is up to how many columns you give it to it. So if you want it to be wider, you can give it more columns. Say for example, you give the 8 columns for the left hand side and 4 columns to the right hand side. But essentially, all the column numbers add up together in the end, they must equal to 12 to make up the entire row. Okay, so that's our design principle. So here we say that we want the column large 8 and tab. So we're going to have that 8 column on the left hand side, and that's the first part. And then we're going to have column large 4. So we're going to have 4 column on the right hand side, and you will know that 8 plus 4 equals to 12, which make up the entire row. Then we have no problem. Alright, so that's the logic. And then the next thing to think about is that what we're going to be putting into the left hand 8 columns is going to be our demonstration cards or the summarization cards. For example, we're going to have the revenues, the sales, the customer numbers, all presented on the very beginning of the dashboard. And then we're going to have our sales report, the line chart, and we're going to have our most recent sales, we're going to have our top sale products, all of those sort of things. Alright, so over here, inside this 8 column, we're going to create a new row to contain all of these items. So we say a new row, and inside here, we're going to have our cost details, and we're going to have our reports, we're going to have our sales and top sales. Now the thing is, where do we get the data? Do we hard coding everything like how we did in the navigation before? In the navigation, I tell you that I'm going to show you one example of mapping the data into our small component. Here's the position to show you that example. We're not going to hard code anything here. Everything on the dashboard are supposed to from the backend URL, which is the API endpoint. And you are supposed to fetch those things from your front end. Okay? So what I'm going to do here is that we're going to import a few hooks. We're going to use the useState hook inside this area, and we're going to say we're going to use the useEffect hook here. And also, we're going to build our backend URL as well for us to fetch data. So far, if you look at your folder, let's just close all of those. And this is the original folder looks like. I want you to build from the very outside a new folder and call it API, because we are going to store our mock API data inside this folder. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to copy and paste in the thing I have prepared for you, which is this one, info.json, which is a JSON file. And in this project, we are going to use a JSON server to create a mock API endpoint to serve this data on the backend. It's like there's no difference between the mock API and the real world API. You can make the GET request from the backend URL, and then you can map those data onto your component. So just like it's a JSON array when it's mapped on the URL, and then it will then be converted into the JavaScript array that contains the JavaScript objects. Let's quickly go through the data to see what does it contains. It has the cost information, which is the sales summary, revenue summary, and also the customer summary. It also has the news data, because remember, in the very beginning of the video, I showed you that we're going to have a news list to present it to the user. This is the data for the news. And we have our, the next part is going to be the top selling, which is the top sales product. And we have our recent sales details. With all of those data, we have our recent activity. So everything comes in the JSON data. And by the way, this data, I will put it a link into the description. You can download it, including all the images that has been used in this project. I will supply those assets for free. You can download from the description link. And if you want to code along or practice on your own. Okay. So now we know that this is where data comes from. The next thing to do is that how are we going to serve this data using the JSON server? So what I want you to do is that you need to install something called JSON server on your computer. So open up your terminal, and this is the one that runs your project. Don't touch it. This is the second one. So here we cleared the panel, and you want to install that JSON server by typing npm install JSON server. And -G, you must install it globally for you to use in this project. If you are using Mac, you probably want to key in sudo before this line of code. And because sudo allows you to install things globally, you have to type in the password of your computer for it to be executed. Alright? So once you've done that, because I already installed a JSON server, there's no need for me to install it again. But once you install it, you're supposed to run this file by typing in the code like JSON server -- watch. You must give the port for you to run this backend URL. I'm using port 4000, and then you must tell the computer where is the JSON file that has been stored for you to run on the backend. We know that the file has been stored in the public folder, outside the public folder, in a very external folder called API, and inside it we're going to find a info.json file. So we're just going to say period slash API slash info.json. All right. So just be very careful with the typing. The JSON server -- watch -- port 4000, and then which is the directory of your JSON file. And once you've done that, you hit enter, and then you will see that the home page for this API is localhost 4000, and under localhost 4000 we have many routes. So we are building multiple routes with one JSON file, which is this info.json. And here you can access the cause information, the news, the top selling, the top sales, and the top activity. All right. So hold the command key, and then you press one of those. You will see this thing has been served on your backend URL, which is the API endpoint. Like how you build a real project. In a real project, this is what it exactly looks like for the backend API. Okay, you have no problem. And then the next job we're going to do is that we're going to fetch data from this mock API and then map it into our front-end component. All right. So going back to our editor, leave this one on. You must leave the terminal on, and leave this one on. So now we have 2 terminals running. So you can shut down the terminal, but do not close off it. Okay, you cannot delete this, otherwise it won't work. Just temporarily close off the terminal, but leave both one running. And then we're going back to the dashboard. I show you how do we gonna fetch those data. The way to do so, we're gonna firstly create a local state variable called cars, because we're gonna map view cars on the screen, and we say that cars and set cars, which is equal to use state. Inside the brackets of the state, that defines the initial state of the state variable, which is going to be an empty array. But once we fetch data from the backend API, this empty array will be reassigned with the JSON array you just saw. Okay, so we have that one done. The next thing is to do the data fetching. What I'm going to do, I'm going to copy and paste the function over here. Inside this function, I wrote a fetch data function, which is an arrow function. We use the built-in fetch method inside the React.js or the JavaScript. We fetch from the backend URL, the backend API, a localhost 4000/cause, which is this one you're looking at. And then once we have that, we convert our JSON array into a JavaScript array, and then we update the local state variable cause to the new array that we just fetched from the backend using the setCause function. If we encounter any errors, we're going to console.log that error. That's a very basic function for us to fetch the data. And once you've done that, you're going to think about how exactly are we going to run this function, because so far you will see this one is, has been faded away. It never has been used before. And the way to use it is that we're going to use that use effect hook like this. Inside the use effect hook is whenever this component gets mounted on the browser, this function will be run. This is exactly the time for you to fetch data. So once you have that, we've called the fetch data function using that use effect hook. So whenever the dashboard component gets mounted on the browser, this function will be called, and this part will be running, and the data will be retrieved from the backend URL and gets updated into our local variable. All right. So that's exactly how we do the data thing. But now, once we have the data, how do we show the data inside our component parts? So here is the place for us to put the data. Say for example, we have the row, and we want to map the data into some kind of a cars component. But we haven't built that cars component yet. So what we're going to do is that inside our component, we're going to create a new file, and we're going to call it the cars.jsx, and rfce, enter. So we're going to create a cars component. And inside here, we know that eventually we're going to pass a cars objects as the property value into this child component. So we're just going to say, let's see that objects of the card has the name property, has the icon, has the amount. Let's just use one of those to do a test purpose. Let's just say here, instead of running a hard-coded rows, we'll say card.name. So now you have your card component, and we're going to show the name of that card. And the next job is for us to do the data mapping. So here we're going to write a bit of a JavaScript inside the HTMLs. Whenever you write JavaScript inside the HTMLs on the React project, you have to wrap it with double curly braces. And then we say cars. Firstly, we're going to check if we do have the cars variable ready. If it does, double ampersand, we're going to secondly check if the cars variable, the cars array, has a non-zero length. So we'll say cars.length greater than 0. This is to check that we're fetching the data successfully, instead of we end up with an empty array, which is the initial state of that cars variable. Okay, so then the next thing, if we satisfy both, we're going to do the mapping. We'll say cars.map This is the JavaScript higher order array function. We're going to map each object inside that array into our card component. So here we would say that this one is going to be mapped into our card. So it's a card, because we have already pre-built the cards, so now you can just import it straight away, close it. Whenever you do the higher order array function, you have to assign a key to it. So this key, we're going to be using this key because we know that each card's object has an ID, and we're going to use that. So here we say underscore ID, and then the second property, guess which second property we're going to have to pass into this child component. If you look at the child component, we know that we're going to have a card property here. We have already done the object structuring over here and already fetched the property value over here. So now we must assign that property in the parents component. So we assign that card object to a property named card as well into the child. Alright, so now if you've done that and then you're going back to the browser, you will see we have the string name has been successfully mapped onto our browser, sales, revenue, and customer. If you look at the name of our backend API, sales, revenue, customer, for each of those objects, we have no problem at all. Okay, the only issue is that at the end of the day, we do not want our card to be so simple. We want it to be complicated. So what I will do, the next thing, I'm going to do a copy and paste to show how exactly you want your card to be. Okay, so now let me just delete this part. We know our mapping is working. The next thing is for us to build our stuff. So this is the card design. It's going to be a quite complicated design stuff. And inside here we have another sub-component, because inside the card we are going to have a filter that allows the user to choose today's figure, or this month's figure, or this year figure. This is going to be the filter of the card. And to have that filter ready, we have to create a new component. Here, so here we will say card filter .jsx. We create a card filter, and this filter is going to be a very reusable thing. So here, what I'm going to do is that I'll copy and paste all the filter stuff. And inside here, you know that there's a function that allows the user to change the filter. Whenever the user clicks on today's button, it'll allow you'll change the state of that filter to today. If the user clicks on this month, it will change the state of the filter to this month. So we know that we're going to have a function here. Let's just create a object structuring over here. And this filter change function is going to be passed as a property into the child component card filter. And we know that we're going to create this filter function over here in the parents component. So above the card, at the very beginning, we're going to set the local state like so. So we're going to have the local state variable filter and set filter that will allow the user to change from today, this month, and this year. And initially, it's going to be default set to today. Whenever the user chooses another one, you're probably going to change it to this month and this year. All right. Because we are using the use state hook, and above it, you must import it from React use state. And then we know that a handle filter function is going to be passed as the property value over here into our card filter. So the filter has the property named filter change, which is equal to the handle filter change function. Here's the thing I want to bring on in the React project. The child component is going to raise an event. So say for example here, you raise the onClick events inside a child component by calling this function, right? But what does this function do? Inside the parent component, this thing will be handled, all right? So the function will handle the events in the parent component, and the child component is only responsible for raising that event. Just bear that in mind, all right? So let me just quickly go through this course. It's also a bootstrap setting, give a certain column width. On a very large screen, it's going to take 4 columns, and a medium-sized screen is going to take 6 columns. And remember, total is 12 columns, right? So you know that this is going to be a 1/3, this is going to be half. And then we're gonna give a card class name. And this is the card body, and this is the card title. Inside the card title, we're going to show the user the filter states, what is going to be today's value, or this month's value, or going to be this year's value. And down here, we're just going to show the user all the things that we want. First thing, we're going to present the user with a card icon, because remember, in our backend API, each card has its own icon. And then we're going to show the dollar amount. So this one is allow the user to see the amount of it. If it's a money related amount, or the dollar amount, we're going to local string. So this will give that a 2 decimal money place. And also I'll give this 1,000 comma. You know that every 3 digits in the money is going to be given a comma to separate them out. If you put on this allows that comma to appear. And then we're going to be showing the user the percentage. If it's a percentage, sometimes it gives the user the percentage instead of the amount. We're going to show the percentage of the increase or the decrease. Sometimes if it is increase, it comes with a positive sign. We don't have to write it. But if it's a decrease, it comes with a negative sign. We have to deal with it. The only thing for us to concern is that if it's a positive, we want to make sure that it shows in the green. If it's negative, we want to make sure that it shows in the danger. So this is a conditional rendering of the class name to check if the percentage is greater than 0 or not. If it's a positive one, we shows the success color. Otherwise, we shows the danger color. The success color is green, and the danger color is red. Okay, that's how we separate the increase and the decrease. Okay, and then the last bit, it doesn't really matter what number it is. Because originally inside a file, it comes with a decimal place, but we want to present it in the percentage, so we times by 100 and give the percentage sign. Okay, and then in the end, if it's greater than 0, we tell the user this one has been an increase. If it's a percentage is a negative, we show the user it's a decrease. That's the entire logic. Okay, and the next thing what I'm going to do is to create a card CSS and import it over here. CSS. Another thing for us to import is this card filter, because we use it here and we edited that card filter component already, but we just never have a chance to import them. The easiest way to import is to delete and retype. It'll show you that reminding, and you just tab, and now this thing gets imported up there. Okay, so everything looks so far to me, except I'm going to copy and paste the card CSS. It's going to be a very simple one, so I'm just going to copy and paste in. It tells you the card information, give it a padding, and it redefined the H6 font size and the color. And that's the definition of the card icon. And for different type of card, we're going to show different color for different one. So that's the color of this different icon. So once we've done that, we're going back. As you could see, this thing has been showing correctly over here. If you look at the filter and you changed it, say for example you change to this month, this thing actually changes to this month. This year actually changes to this year. The reason why the number doesn't change is because I only have one set of data in the backend URL. If you do want this one to be changed, you can write different data. Say for example, you can create a sub-object inside a JSON and say this is the annual one, this is the day one, this is the month one. And then whenever this one gets changed, you just have to do another request to the backend URL. That will allow your figure to change. Okay. Because we are building a mock project, I didn't make it super complicated. In the real project, more than likely, whenever you click on this button, it'll trigger another event. This event is actually a data fetching event. That'll make another GET request from the backend and summarize the monthly data and take probably a few seconds to present a new figure here. Okay, so and you see the color is correct. If it's positive, it shows green. If it's negative, it shows red. Increase and decrease all correct, except that the dot position and also the layout seems a bit weird, and that is because I haven't write some settings for the dashboard. So let me just go into the dashboard and write some CSS for it. The filter, I have put the filters CSS over here. So it's going to be the definition of making that position of the filter changes to right, 0, instead of on the left, and give a bit of a margin to the top. And also the filter, we have done a bit of a setting for the icons, hover effects, and also the drop-down effects has been changed as well. If you have some experience with HTML and CSS, you can go through all of this on your own. It's not very, very complicated. The majority of focus of this project is on the React structure and the logic. And it's not a demonstration of HTML and CSS. But it's quite simple. You can go through them. Now once we've done that, let's see, haven't changed. Probably we haven't linked in that file to the dashboard. Let me see. Yeah, that's the reason. Whenever you have a CSS file, you must import it immediately. Otherwise, later on, you're just going to forget it. Once we import it, we're going back, as you can see, the things has been put it into the correct position over here. Okay, so now things looks all okay now. Not bad. And if you look at it again, ideally, I'm supposed to remove the border of the cards. The border of the cards comes naturally with the bootstrap. So I want to make it even nicer. And later on, when we build the remaining things, they're all going to be built by cards. So this is a small cards, And when we build the graph, the table, and the list, it all comes in as a class. The class is a pre-built component inside the Bootstrap. But we're going to do a bit of a rewriting of the code. Going back to your app.css file, and then down the bottom, I want you to check out this code. This is how I redesigned the class, give them a new margin, make sure we will remove the border and have a bit of a border radius, have a bit of a border shadow. Once you have that, your card will be a lot beautiful. This is the card header and footer. We redefine it. Card title, we redefine it. Card title span, the body, and everything. So we rewrite some of the code. This is going to override the Bootstrap default setting. And then if you're going back to your browser, you will see this looks much nicer. The filter is in the correct position. And then we can see this very, very beautiful shadow around the class that will make the class like have a bit of a 3D effect standing out from the page. All right, this is very, very beautiful. So now we have done the class design. So the key features of this one is that we use the data fetching from the backend to find the class. And I done this on the same page inside the dashboard. Ideally, if you want to wrap this entire thing into a separate component and do the data fetching somewhere else, it's entirely up to you. I do this on the same page. It's because for demonstration purpose, this is a lot easier for you to follow the logic and the thoughts. If we do too much wrapping and refactoring, you're probably going to lose the point of study. But you can wrap them into a separate component and import a new component here inside your dashboard. I will show you how to do that in the future component. Okay, so for the class one, let's just leave it like that, which is not super clean and super dry, but it's functioning okay. In the following components, like the recent sales, top activities, I'll show you a better way to do refactoring and make your code even cleaner. Okay, let's move on to the next. The next part we're going to build is the top sales part. So in the same row as the card, we started a new line, and here we give the class name of column 12 because this table, the line chart for the report, and it's going to take the entire row, so we don't have to divide it even further. So give it a 12 column, and we're going to build a report with a line charts that shows the most recent sales and all the things going on. It's a multiple line chart, and to do so, instead of running the chart straight away over here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a new component called report, and JSX RFCE to create a boilerplate. And then we import that report component over here. Report. Done. Okay. So that report gets imported over this 12 column and also loaded into our dashboard. So if we go back, you will see that report is there. That is because in our report component so far, we only have that report text box in it. And our next job is going to build that report component from scratch. So here inside the report component, the first thing we're going to do is to think about what does this report component contains. Ideally, you're going to wrap everything inside a card, like how we did for the first element, like these three. These three components are wrapped in the Bootstrap cards. So the same for the report, even though it's going to be in a graphical table, we still want to wrap everything inside a card. So I'm going to create a div, give the class name, cards, and tab. So we have that. And the next thing to do is to create our card body and card title. What I'm going to do here is to copy and paste the thing that I wrote. As you can see that in the report part, we're also going to inject the card filter like what we designed before. The card filter allows the user to switch between today, this month, and this year, remember? And we're going to reuse this component before. So I'm just going to import that. This is the beauty with React. Once you have that component, it's isolated from each other, and so you can reuse it, import it anytime you want. So since we are using this function again, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy and paste those filter state variable and the filter change function again. And also since we are using the use state hook, I'm going to import it here. So use state. So we have it over here. As you can notice that down here, we have the report charts. That's correct. Because in the end, we're going to load our charts inside this card. But I'm not going to write the chart straight away over here. Instead, I'm going to wrap the charts into a separate component. So inside the component folder, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create that child component called report charts. JSX. Enter RFCE to have that boilerplate ready. And for this report chart, it's going to be this one. So since we have already created this boilerplate, I'm just going to import it, make sure that we encounter no error. all the child component that has been used down below has been successfully imported. And if you're going back to the browser, you will see that this card has already been visible. This switch function is working this month, this year. This is all loading with no problem at all. And the report chart.text worth is showing. That is because in the report chart, so far we're only keying that text worth. And the next job for us to do is to import the third-party library that we installed at the very beginning of the video, this one, React Apex Charts. We're using this one to build our line graph here. So to do that importation, just copy this line, import chart from React Apex Charts, and then you can access all the feature for the chart. And to do so, I'm going to show you how. First thing in the job is that we're going to create a state variable using the useState hook. So here we say useState. We use that useState hook to create a local variable to store our data. So we have to say that const data and set data, that one equals to useState. And inside this useState, what we're going to do is to store our table data. Okay, so what I'm going to do is to copy and paste the table data and explain to you what's going on there. So that's going to be our table data. Here I just do it in a simple way. In the real world, this data, as you can see, it comes as a JavaScript object that contains JavaScript array and further array or another objects. Ideally, this JavaScript type of variable can be converted into JSON. Basically means that these data are also available from the backend JSON URL. If you can fetch the data from the backend and convert it into the JavaScript or something like this, and then render it into the table. I'm just skipping one thing in this project. Instead of fetching from the backend, I have this one stored as a local variable and explain it for you. So we have 3 data series, one for sales, one for revenue, one for customer. These are the data value. And we set up the chart options. Give the certain height. It's going to be an area chart with a toolbar show false. And also we want the 3 different lines to show the data. The different line have a different color. And also we want to have the viewpoint. We have the data label enabled false. And also we have all these settings for time as well. Once you have defined all of these features for the charts, you can now down below return that charts to the user using this charts component that we imported from the React Apex charts. So down here, instead of return that, delete, parentheses, we're going to return this charts with the option equals to the data above, which is the data local variable options. That's this one. And also we have the data equals to data series, and that is that one. And also we have the type equals to the type that we have defined above, height equals to the chart height that we have defined above. So you must define all the features, options, and properties and values of the data above, or fetch it from the backend URL and got it stored in the local variable before you can render it into the chart component. That's how it works. So once we have that done, our report chart is finalized. If we're going back, we can see this line chart has been perfectly delivered to the user. Reloaded, you will see that initial loading effects, even though we shrink the sidebar, this one is going to extend itself automatically. Very, very cool. So this is how we're going to use the Apex charts to do things. It's a very handy work to build your dashboard. Just bear in mind that this data for this project, I use a local variable. If you want to build a dynamic table for the real project, this data is supposed to come in from the database and from the backend API. Our next job is to build our following parts, the recent sales. Okay, so as you can see, just one more comment for the previous graph. You don't have to do any CSS for it because the colors and the style of that table or the chart has been defined over this option setting already. You don't have to do a separate definition in the CSS file, which is very easy to handle. So we close off this report, and down here we're going to do another object for our recent sales table. So below this row, we create a new row, which is also going to take the entire column of the 12. And then in here, we're going to build a separate component called recent sales. So instead of writing the code here, we build a separate component and call it recent sales JSX, enter RFCE, got that boilerplate, and very quickly, we're going to say recent sales.css, enter. So now we have this file, CSS file combined for it. So we're just going to import it over here. recent sales .css done. So that one has been there. So back to the dashboard, what we're going to do is just going to import this recent sales child component by saying recent sales, and then make sure you import it correctly right above. Everything's there. Just going back to the browser to see, yep, that thing has been successfully imported. As you can see, the text was showing. Basically means that the thing under our child component has been presented on the browser. The next job is to build it. So inside here, the recent sales also need us to fetch data from the backend URL. And as you can see, I opened up the terminal. We have many routes. We have the cars, news, recent sales is one of those. So just press command and then press enter. Reload it. Yep, it's showing up. So now we have our another URL that shows the most recent sales. The data also comes in the JSON format, and we're going to fetch it from the backend API and convert it into the JavaScript array, which contains all of these objects. Okay, and also you can look at for each object, it has the property of ID, number, customer, product, price, and status. So we're going to use all of these. So we're just going back to our editor, shut down the terminal for now, and then here for the recent sales, instead of writing this, what I'm going to do is to copy and paste the code that I write. It's very similar to what we designed earlier. Also, all the things must be contained using that bootstrap class. And also, we're going to use our card filter again. So here, I'm just going to delete and re-import this one for the above. And also, we're going to build a child component to hold our table. And so far, we have our card title there. So as you can see, in here, we're going to need a child component to hold the table data. So inside the component folder, I'm just going to create recent sales table JSX, enter RFCE. So now we have our table ready. And then you're just going to save it. And then you import it over here. That's all. Okay. So now the next job for us to think about is that how do we get the data anyway? Where the data come from? The data come from the backend URL. We must do the data fetching somewhere. Ideally, we can either do the data fetching in the table or do the data fetching over here. It doesn't really matter. It both work. I'm going to show you to fetch data in the parent component and pass the entire data as the property to the child component. It's absolutely okay. So what we're going to do here is going to use some hooks in React. One is the use state hook. The other one is the use effect hook. Once we have those two, we're then going to do some of the initial settings over here. So we create a local state variable called items to create all of those items that we fetched from the backend URL. Initially, it's going to be an empty array. Once we've done the data fetching, it's going to be like this. Okay. The second thing is a typical filter to store our local filter variable. The reason why I use local filter variable for each of the local component for each of the cars, because these all having the filter. Somebody may be asking, why don't you do a global filter variable? We can't do it because we use a global one. Everyone shares that variable. If you change this one to this month, and everything else will change to the month as well. We want them to be separate to each other. Each one gets only controlled inside itself. So that's why we have to do it locally for the future. Okay, this one has been explained. The next job is that we're going to fetch data from the backend and then update our item local variable to the backend URL. And the way to do so is very similar to what I have done before, like this. First, we fetch data from the URL routes, the API, and then we update the local state variable item to that backend data. And then when this component gets mounted on the browser, we trigger this function and do the data fetching. The local variable items get updated and then passed as a property value to the child component. The child component then will get this property value. So we do an object destructuring. Here we'll say items. That's how we fetched it from the parents. All right. So now we have done a table. Inside the table, there's going to be some kind of work that I'm going to do. So let me show you. Instead of returning this text words, what I'm going to do is to return the entire table. So that's what the table looks like. We'll create a bootstrap table with all the table head. And inside the table body, we're going to check, do we have the items ready? And if that item is not an empty array, both conditions got satisfied, we're going to map that the data, that item, into each row of our table. So the following stuff is going to be the row of our table. If we have, say, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items here, and we're supposedly to map them into 5 rows in our table. Okay, so with the customer, number, product, and price we want to keep 2 decimal places. And also, the status is a key thing to look at. If you look at here, we got 3 different types of status for each item. Some of the sales has been approved, some of the sales is on pending, some of the sales has been rejected. And we want to show this text words on the table as well. And going back to see, if we fetch the status over here, showing the words of it, that's absolutely okay. But for the color, the background color is really tricky, because we want to show the approved one in green, the rejected one in red, and also the pending one in yellow. However, in the Bootstrap, they have this default background color for red and also for green and for yellow. We have to do the conditional rendering of the class name to satisfy the Bootstrap color for the background. And the way to do so is that I wrote a function to handle the background color switch. Let me show you how. Above that return, this is the handle status function. You have to pass in the status as the variable and do the switch function. Just depending on what status is, if it's approved, we're going to return a success name. If it's pending, we're going to return warning. If it's rejected, we're going to return danger. And that is because in Bootstrap, success has a background color of green, warning has a background color of yellow, and danger has a background color of red. Those things have been predefined by Bootstrap. You don't have to worry about it. You just need to know the background color in Bootstrap can come in these 3 different types. And here, depending on what status that product has been on, we choose to show the user the different background color in Bootstrap. So once you've done that, hopefully this thing has been correctly loaded. And once you go back to the browser, you will see that everything has been loaded in a very beautiful way. And this filter is absolutely working. The status is showing the correct color. Approved ones are all shown in green. The pending is in yellow. The rejected is in red background color with no problem at all. Very beautifully handled. Okay, this is how we can build a table in a dashboard. Our next step is to do the top selling component just right below the recent sales, which is going to be another table down below. So back to the editor, following the same kind of approach, div column 12, create a new row with a column that contains the whole row, and then we're going to do a new component called top setting. So inside the component folder, create a new file called top setting, JSX, and then enter RFCE to create a boilerplate. And also inside the setting folder, we're just going to do a CSS file called top setting.css. Right after that, quickly import that CSS file into this component folder, the component file, and then we are ready to import the top setting component inside the dashboard. So we say top setting tab, and then just check right above, this thing has been successfully imported. So now we have our top sales table, and later on we're going to build our top setting table. But just have a look at the browser to see. Here we go. We have that top setting text word showing on the browser. Basically means that our component has been built successfully over here, right? So now the job left for us to fetch another data from the URL, the backend URL, and then map that data into the top setting table. Currently, we are on the recent sales API, but if we're going back to the editor, open up the terminal, we can see we do have the API endpoints for top setting. Hold your Command or Control key and press it. It's reloaded. And now you can see that we have this top setting endpoint API showing off with the 5 objects. Each have the property of preview, image, routes, and name and price and sold, the numbers of sold. So we're going to map this thing. First, we're going to fetch data from this endpoint, and then we're going to map this thing into our UI component. So now back to the editor. Let's just do the preparation. Here, same as before, we're going to use the use state hook and also the use effect hook. After that, we're going to set up a few local variables to handle the state change. One is the items. The item is going to be a local variable that stores the data that we fetched from the backend URL. And then we have our filter, because for each class, like before, we do have this filter button. Each class will have this that allows the user to change the frequency of the data. And we just have to do that local filter variable again to allow this filter to be handled locally, belong to this top setting card only. Alright? And the next job is for us to fetch data from the backend API that we just showed over here. So above the return, what we're going to do is we're going to fetch data from the backend URL, the API endpoint, top setting, and then load that data into our local variable by using the setItem function. So once we've done that, the local state variables items will be updated to the backend JSON data. And then whenever this top setting component gets mounted on the browser, we're going to use the use effect hook to trigger this fetch data function. Alright, so now we have everything. And the next job is for us to build this component. So what I'm going to do is going to copy and paste the component code that I already prepared for you. As you can see, the first part is also the card filter. So let me just import that card filter component right above, like before. And the second thing is going to be our top setting table with all of those head. This is our table head with a preview, with the product, the price, sold, and revenue. And then in the table body, since we get the data from the backend, we're going to map all of this data into our table row. Each represents one row. So we're going to build a component and isolate this component to a separate one to contain the rows of each table. Alright, so now let me just build a new component called top setting item JSX, enter, RFCE. So now we have this item component. So inside here we know that it's going to take a property value of the item and also assign it to the property called item as well. So what we're going to do, we're going to do the object destructuring here to destructure that item property. And then we're going to build the row of the table like so by saying that inside this table, we're going to fetch the data's preview image and also the item's name, the price, keep it 2 decimal places, the numbers of items that has been sold, and also we're going to calculate the price and the sold. Time those two together, you're going to have the total revenue of that item has been generated. Alright, this is going to be one row of the table, and this is going to map our entire array into each row of them. Okay, so now since we have built a child component, we could just import it as a parent component over here. Everything has been done successfully. So now if you're going back to the browser, you will see we now have another table that shows the top selling products, except that we are missing the preview image, and that is because we haven't built the image folder inside our public folder yet. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to copy the asset folder that I prepared for you into our public folder. Entire asset folder. Assets, and we move this item folder inside this asset folder. Move. So it's gonna be the directory logic is you're gonna have a assets folder, and inside the assets folder you're gonna have the item folder, and inside the item folder, and you're gonna have all the images. So this has to match the routes that you have defined in your API endpoint, assets, items, and then the image name. All right. Otherwise, you won't fetch that routes, and you won't see the image. So now we have that assets and item folder and all the images contained inside our public folder. If you're going back and you reload, you'll get to see all the preview images have been showing on, but the size of the image isn't correct. That is because we haven't done the CSS yet to control the size of the image. But going back to the editor, we do have a file called top setting. So we're going to the top setting, and then I'm just going to copy and paste in the top setting CSS code that give a bit of a font size. Just make sure the background color is correct, and also the most important, we have to control the maximum width of the image. And once we've done that, we're going back, you will see all the image size has been controlled in a very correct way. The font size and the color and the background are all correct. And just one more thing to mention, that I forgot to put the CSS for the recent sales table before. So now let me just open up the recent sales CSS. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to copy and paste the recent sales CSS, a very simple one, and also make it look nicer. It's very simple CSS code. Just readjust the font size, readjust the padding and the borders. Once you've done that, you're going back to see this recent sales looks a little bit more decent than before. So now we have our complete left-hand side done for the dashboard, which contains the dashboard cards that summarize the sales, revenue, and the customer, and also the report table, which is a multiple line graph, and also the recent sales table, which is a table, and also the top selling table, which is another table. Each of the tables are done in cars, the bootstrap cars, and we have this customized filter function that allows the user change the frequency of the data to be presented. Alright, so now we have this part done. If you shrink the side menu over here, you will see this thing moves perfectly. It responds according to the way you react with your side menu. And the next job for us to do is the right hand side of the dashboard, which contains another few accessory things for us to build. Let's just move on. So over here, we're going to build our component on the right hand side of the dashboard. The first one is going to be the recent activity. This is going to take our right hand side 4 columns, because remember the left hand component takes the 8 columns already, and the right hand side will take the remaining 4 columns. That will add up to total 12 columns for the row. Okay, so the first component on the right hand side is going to be the recent activity. So inside the component folder, let's just create a new one called recent activity.jsx, enter, and then rfce to create a boilerplate. And inside this boilerplate, what we're going to do is going to build a very similar component like what we did before, because the recent component is also going to show in the cards. So what I'm going to do here is to copy and paste the card that I built already, like so. And here we use that card filter again. I'm not going to explain it again. You know that what's going on here. Allow the user to change the frequency of the data. And also, since we have that, and we're going to fetch data from the backend URL as well. So open up the terminal that you already opened up, and you will find that there's another API endpoint called recent activity. Hold your command key and click on it. Just reload, and you will see this one comes out that shows all the data array for the recent activity. And with the property of time, this is when this activity comes in, color of that activity, and also with a bit of a content, and also do you want this thing to be highlighted or not. If it's highlighted, that basically means it's a priority of the activity. And then we're going back. Now we just want to fetch data from that URL and store it in a local variable called items, and then map it into each individual item for that activity. This is going to be the child component. So a couple of things to do. The first thing is also going to be to import the React use state hook and also the use effect hook. And then the second thing, I'm going to copy and paste in the local state variable for the items. This is going to store the data that we fetch from the endpoint, and also our local filter variable. We have explained this one for many times. So this allows the user to change the local state variable for the filter. And then the next job is about to do the data fetching. And the data fetching is going to be our new routes, which is localhost 4000/recent activity. And then once we have the data, we're going to set the local state variable items to the data that we fetch from the endpoint. And then whenever this component gets loaded on the browser, firstly mounted, we're going to trigger this fetch data function, the same logic. So once we have that, we're allowed to map this data into our child component for each. So now we have our recent activity here. Let's just going back to the column 4 and import that recent activity. Second one, save. So now we have our activity component has been imported. Just double check above, this thing is there. And the one last thing for us to do is to build this child component so that each line of the individual activity can be shown. So inside this component folder, I know that now this folder is getting quite long and large. In a real project, you want things to be more detailed and more accurate. You can build subfolders inside here and store all the components inside each of the subfolders. That'll make things probably a bit more nicer. But these things comes in alphabetical order, so for me it's still okay to maintain it. So inside the component folder, what I'm going to do is to have that recent activity item JSX rfce, so have that boilerplate. So once I have that, I'm just going to copy and paste in the code that I wrote. We know that for this component, it's going to take the property value from the parents of the item, and then the property value is also going to be the item. So we have to do the object destructuring of that property, and then down here we can fetch all the things of that property. I have accidentally copied one more line. Here we go. So now we can access the features or the property of that item, of the time, the color, the content, and also just to check if this thing has a highlight. If the thing has a highlight, we're just going to have to do a bit of a coding to find out the string method. We're using a lot of a JavaScript string method. I'll show you later on what's going on here, but let me just show you the result of this code over here. So now we have the child component build. We just have to import it here in the parent component. Check the above, the recent activity item is there, and we're going back to the browser. You will see that thing has been loaded It's not been ideally styled, but you will see all the content information is there, all the highlights is there. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a CSS file for this one as well. Let's see if we have one. No, not yet. So just inside the component folder, we create a CSS called recent activity.css. Enter. So now let me just go ahead and copy and paste the CSS that I prepared for you, which is not a lot. Just pretty much redefine the font size, redefine the paddings, and also give them the correct position, all of those sort of things. You can go through all of these. If you want to type up this code, you can always pause the video to see what's going on there. It's not super complicated. So now we have that CSS file. Over here, I'm just going to import it. It's called recent activity CSS. And now we're going back. You will see this thing looks much nicer. So what's going on here is that if you look at the original URL, that has the content of that activity, which is a description, a brief one, but also it has the highlights sometimes. Basically means some of the words inside the contents that need to be highlighted like this. And we want to show that highlighted words in bold. That's the kind of CSS we want to touch upon. Alright? But you cannot say that every one of them have the highlights. Say for example the second one, it only have the content, but the highlights is empty. Basically means this is a very non-important message and non-important activity that nothing need to be highlighted. So in your JavaScript code or React code, you must be able to identify if the message or the activity contains the highlights. If it does, we must make it bold. So the part of the kind of code that we wrote over here is trying to handle that. This is a JavaScript string method. So firstly, we have to do a check if that highlight is empty or not, like this conditional rendering. If it's empty, basically means we got nothing to highlight, then we're just going to show the content straight away without highlighting anything in bold. Alright? Otherwise, after the colon, if it does have the highlights, basically means the highlights text word is not empty. We do have something over here, like so. And then we're going to have to identify where to highlight it in the content. So here we use the substring method, and then we started off from the 0 index and the end of that highlights, the index of that highlights. We want to show that. And then in the middle part, we want to make sure the highlighted words showed in bold. This is the bootstrap setting. And then we're going to cut off from the end of the highlighted words, and then begin from there, the index of the highlighted words, to the end of that contents index, which is the -1. Here, using this method, the slice one, we are okay to do the remaining words in an unbold style. So like so, this is unbold, this is bold, and the remaining stuff is unbold. So we have to find the index of the beginning position of the highlights, and then the index of the ending position of the highlights, and then we have to cut them up into 3 separate parts. The first part is unbold, the highlighted part is in bold, and the remaining is unbold. So using this logic, I designed all of this conditional rendering so that the user can always see the highlighted words in bold. Alright, hope you could approach this and try to manage on your own. So now we have our recent activity done. If we try this one, it looks the filter works okay, and then we're just going to keep building the next part. The next part is also going to be a graph, a new graph that is different from the one that we built before. So now let's just close off this component that has already been built. Activity, and this one as well. So now below that recent activity, what I'm going to build is a new one called the budget report. So that'll show the user the budget of our company. So inside the component folder, create a new file called budget report JSX RFCE. We have that boilerplate done, and then over here we're just going to import it back. Budget report. So as soon as you have that, just going back to check on the browser, this thing has been there. That basically means our child component has been successfully built and then imported successfully as well. On the report, so here's what we're going to build. The same logic as before. We're going to build it using the card, the bootstrap card. And as soon as we have a card, we're going to have a filter. So it's the same logic. Here, we're going to import the use state hook. And then we're going to create the settings for the local filter variable. And then we're going to import the card that I have prepared for you. Opening, closing parentheses, import the card. And now again, we are using the card filter here. So I'm just going to import it right at the top. Alright, down below you can see that we are using one of the child components called budget chart, and that is because I want to show you the chart in a separate component. So here I'm just going to say a new file called a budget chart JSX, enter RFCE. Make sure that we have this chart imported here. If everything has been imported and linked together correctly, going back to the browser, you will see this card is there, the filter is working, and also our chart text process has been showing to the user. Now let's just build the chart. The chart is going to be a different method. We use the third-party library. Remember, in the package.json file, we firstly use this React Apex charts. Now I'm going to use another chart called eCharts to build this one. We have installed this third-party dependency at the very beginning of this video. If you haven't done so, you can install it now. And then going back to the budget chart, firstly we're going to have to import the library at the very right beginning on the top. That basically means import everything as eCharts from eCharts. This thing has been stored in the node module, so you don't have to worry about it. And once you have done that, in this part we're going to use the use effect hook. So I will have to import it here. Down below, we're going to create a settings for our charts using that use effect hook. So what I'm going to do, over here, under use effect hook, we initialize the settings for the eCharts, and by saying that we're going to create a selector ID called budget chart, and then we set the following options for it. We will have the name, and for each column, and administration, technology, customer support. These are the budget categories, and also the value of it has been set below. And this is the series title, and also the data value. Everything has been set over here. And down here, what we're going to do is a very simple one. In the return part, we're just going to return a div with that budget chart ID and tells the computer what's the maximum height of it. Alright? Since we have given it ID, and here in the use effect hook, we found that ID, and under that ID we set the following options, and then the chart can be loaded over here. And by the way, this chart data can also come in from the backend API endpoint. You don't have to card hold it here, because we do not build a database in this project, so I just leave it as a card coding. But if you do have a backend routes, something like this, you can build a mock one and fetch data from the backend, which is absolutely okay, and that will make your table dynamic. Now if you go into the budget report, you will see that report has been beautifully presented there. If you reload your dashboard, you can see this initial loading CSS effects going on as well, which is really cool. So now we have our budget report done, and this one also allows you to choose one over another, so you can close off one, only showing one, and this one as well. You don't have to concern the CSS of it, because the CSS comes with the charts already. It's a design by default. Okay, so now we have done our budget report, which is another component. If you want to have this data in, you can just pause the video and type them up and close off this one. On the dashboard, the next thing we are going to build is going to be a new chart, and also using that eChart as well. We call it the web traffic. We want to see which traffic supplies the most value, or the numbers of customers for our application. So over here on the component, we build a new one called web traffic JSX RFCE to create a boilerplate for that web traffic. And inside this web traffic component, it's going to be the same logic. But firstly, we're going to import the use state hook. And the second thing is that we are going to create our local state variable for the filter, because we are going to use the filter here as well. And then the next thing is to create our web traffic cart inside our return, like so, and import that cart filter at the top. So this one is done. The next thing is to build our child component to load that chart. If I comment this out, so far, going back to the browser, we only created this component but haven't imported it yet. Let me just import it over here first. Web traffic. So now this one gets imported. So if you look at the browser, this thing has been successfully imported. The filter should be working alright, but we haven't built the graph yet. The graph is going to be on a separate component as well, like so. So release this comment. And then inside, I'm just going to copy this name. This is when you do the React project for a long time, the way you think about a project has been completely changed. You know how many subcomponents you need, and when you design a page, you will have those subcomponent or child component pre-built in your mind, and you can just give a name to it and have it ready, and then you just create that component in a folder and then build it. All right, it has to be a long-term practice for you to get into that kind of status, but it's you'll be getting there soon if you keep practicing. JSX. So now we have that child component RFCE boilerplate is done, and inside here it's going to be a very similar settings as what we did in the previous graph. Use effect hook gets imported, and we're gonna use that to use eCharts again over here. So now let me just copy and paste that use effect hook. So here we're gonna say find the ID inside our DOM element that called the traffic chart, and then we're gonna do the setting. It's going to be a chart like this with all of these settings, and give a series of name, access form, all of those things. We have the data. The data is the most important key thing. I hard-coded all the data here, but ideally it is supposed to come from the backend API with the value and the name. This is the name of our traffic, search engine, direct email, ads, or video, all of those sorts of things, and you have to give the value. As soon as you have those things, you can return it in a div with the ID name that we have predefined over here, like so. So we just return that in a div with the same ID name. These two must match each other. Don't forget the hyphen, the hash, otherwise it won't work. And also set up the minimum height for it. So once you've done that, you're going back. Oh, this one haven't been imported. That's all right. Because we built it, we haven't imported. So we're just going to import it over here, like so. Going back, you will see this is a circle chart of the web traffic that shows the different resources of the traffic, which one takes the most proportion of it. All right. So just showing off you again, to set up a circle graph, this is the setting you should do. The keyword is the pie. You tell the computer, I'm going to use a pie chart, give them a radius, and it will show it like that. All right. This is another chart that we have defined, like so. Cool. So the web traffic is done. We are getting close to the end. So now we pretty much have the left hand all completed. The right hand, we have those two charts completed as well. The last but not least part is the news. The news is going to be presented something like this, but much simpler. So if we opened up the terminal now, control backtick, and we do notice that there's another route called news. So we just hold command key and opened up this one. So now you get to see the routes for the news, and you can use this one to map your news component. So turn this off. So down here, what we're gonna do is to create our news component. So inside the component folder, we're gonna create a new file called news, JSX, enter, RFCE. We have that boilerplate done, and quickly create a new file called news, CSS. I'm gonna import it back. Done. Alright, so now we have that news ready. So what we're gonna do is to import that news back over here. Just double check this thing has been successfully imported in the dashboard. So now if we're going back to the browser, you will see the news is there. That basically means we have created our child component successfully. Back to the editor. So now we're going to the news and start to build. Again, it's the same logic. The news is going to fetch data from this endpoint and then map it into the news child component. So what we do is to decide which dependencies we're going to use in the React. Of course, we're going to use the use state hook and also import the use effect hook. Those two. And the next job is for us to set up the local state variable. One state variable is to hold the data of the news that we fetched from the backend URL. The other one is to handle the local filter. We have done this many times. You know what's going on here. And then right after that, it's going to do the data fetching. So the next job is going to be like this. We create a fetch data function. We fetch data from the localhost 4000/news, which is this one. And then once we have the data ready, we reset the local news data, the local news variable to the data that we fetched. And then this function will be triggered whenever this component gets mounted on the browser. Alright, so now we have that one ready. The next part is to create our component code over here. So inside the return, I copy and paste in. it takes in two child components. One is the card filter, the other one is that each individual news item that need to be mapped using the backend URL data. This one we already built, so I'm just gonna quickly import it, check the above, that thing has been imported. Another child item that we need to build is the news post item. So in the component folder, we're gonna create a new one called the news post item JSX RFCE. Once you've done that, and you will notice that from the parent component, it takes the item as a property. The value of that property is also the item, which is the one that has been mapped in. So over here in the child component, you must do the object destructuring to fetch that property, and then you can do the remaining job. Okay. So if you look at the browser now, just one more thing. Here we create the child component. Oh, we haven't imported yet. Let me just quickly import it. So right above we import a child. If you're going back, you will see we have repeated for like 5 times of the same text words. And the reason is because in our backend we have 5 elements for the news. Instead of mapping it for 5 times but repeatedly, what I'm going to do is going to build this news post item child component. It's going to be a very easy one. So here, delete, paste. It's going to be the post item. First we're going to fetch the image, and then we're going to have the title, and then we're going to have the subtitle. That's all. Alright, so once you have that, you're going back, you will see this thing has been showing all correctly, but the design, it looks pretty ugly because we haven't put on the CSS yet. So going back to the editor and opened up the news CSS, I'm going to copy and paste in the CSS code and explain to you. We want to have a bit of a margin for the post item, and the most importantly, you must control the size of the image. We'll give a certain width, otherwise it will go overflow the page. And also control the font size of the title, the margin, make it bold. Make sure you do a bit of a definition for the color of the anchor tag and the paragraph as well. So once you've done all of those, you're going back to the browser, you will see this looks much nicer and very decent for each user to click on the most recent news of today, or this month, or this year, and to fetch what I wanted to see. Alright, so now we have pretty much finalized all the body part of our admin dashboard, which is a really cool one that contains too many dynamic informations. It's sufficient for the small to medium organization staff to work on their own to see what's going on. It supplies all this dynamic data. The majority of the data of the body of the dashboard coming from the backend endpoint that we build instead of a hard coding. Alright, and the remaining job for us to do is to do a bit of a footer down here, and also we're going to add a add to top back button or down the corner to finalize this project. So now let's just close off this few child component. So if you look at this dashboard file, it only takes us about within 60 lines, which is very clean. And also you could make it even cleaner by just wrapping this into a separate component called cars. Actually, instead of saying, let me just do it right now to show you what's going on. So we can build another component called cars, plural, because we do have the singular one. And that will be saying cars.jsx, enter. And over here, instead of do the mapping like this, we do want to take all of our this code into our component, like so. Since we do that, we're also going to have to drag these two over here. Oops, over here. So we also need to get our card, the child component, imported over here. And then the next job is that instead of showing the mapping over here, we're just going to cut. And then we're going to do the mapping over here. Alright. Actually, we do have to wrap them into a empty angle brackets. So that thing is done. Just double check that we do have the cost variable there, and we fetch it from the backend URL. We have the initial loading correctly, everything. So now here we end up with nothing. So what you can do is just simply import that cars component, like so. Actually, we want to put it at the very top. Alright, so going back to the browser to see, everything works the same. Nothing changes. This thing here is all good, okay? So everything works the same. Nothing actually being affected so far, which is pretty cool, okay? And now if you look at your dashboard code, it only takes like 40 lines, and it's super clean. It has a section wrapper, and it set up the the column structure on the Bootstrap, and then each individual part of the dashboard has been built under a separate component, all of these. And it's very clear for you to identify which one to go if there's any errors or anything that you want to maintain in the future. All right, this is like the a very dry way of writing your React code. So ideally, you should control your line of code for each file under 60 lines, maximum 80 lines. Anything go beyond that is going to make your code on one page very messy, and you will lose your capacity to maintain it in the future. All right, this is looks pretty nice now. The next job is for us to build a footer. Let's just move on and do that. And to think about where to put our footer, should we put our footer inside the body of the dashboard? No, the footer should cover the entire app, regardless of which one to show. So the ideal place to put the footer is to put it on the very outside of the app. So let's just go to the app.js, close off this thing, and this thing as well. So leave the dashboard on in case we're going to use it. So now over the app, we have the header, the sidebar, the main. The main wraps the dashboard, and the footer should be just right below the main. Okay. So inside the component, let's create a new component called footer, JSX, RFCE. So we're going to build a fresh one under that footer component and give a bit of a CSS to make it look nicer. Actually, this is going to be a very simple one. I'm going to create a new file called footer.css and import it back. .css like so, and then the next job is to show you the footer that I built. It was a footer with a class name and ID. It shows the copyrights and also who has designed it. Very simple layout. It's just that when you put on the CSS, it looks a bit better. That's the CSS to adjust the padding, the font size, and the color of each. So when you're going back to the app, you must import that footer below that main. So now you make sure that the footer has been correctly imported, and you just double check. Well, it's there. It says that the copyright is the DStudio, and this one has been designed by me, and that kind of things. But if you like to modify this project, you want to redo in your own way, that's okay. And we're done. Okay, we're pretty much with 98% of the progress of this project. But there's only one last thing. If you notice, when you scroll down, the top part of the dashboard goes hidden and overflowed by the header. We do need a back to top button down the corner so the user can use it smoothly. So back to the editor. We also want to add another button in the app page to enable that functionality of the back to top. So inside our component folder, we create a new file called back to top. You can name something else you want, scroll back or whatever, JSX. So that thing's done. Let's close off the footer, and also we're going to create a CSS file called the same name, back to top.css. So that one's there, and then import it. Back to top, period slash from the same folder. All right. So now I'm just going to copy and paste in this component to show you the key thing is not the design of the CSS for this part. The key thing is that how we're going to enable this back to top features. It incurs a few things to handle. So firstly, we're going to import the use state hook and also the use effect hook. So down here, we have to know when in the end we're going to show that back to top button, right? At the very beginning, when the user not scrolling the dashboard, the back to top button should be hidden. Soon as the user starts to scroll the page, that back to top button should show. Alright, so we must know the scroll position of the page to be able to handle that kind of events. So here is a situation where we're going to use the local state variable. I created one called scroll to find the scroll position. Initially, when the user not scrolling the page, the position has been set to 0. But soon as the user starts to scroll, we must add an events listener to listen to that scroll events using the use effect hook. So down below that, I write this one. As soon as the user starts to scroll, the window going to add an events listener called scroll, and we start to listen the window scroll Y, which is the vertical position of the scroll, and then we update the scroll position. Initially it's 0. As soon as the window have the new scroll position, we update it using the set scroll function. Alright, so we've done that. And this thing will always change whenever the scroll position changes. So we add one dependency to it. Okay, and then down here in the return, the button itself is quite simple. It's just going to be an anchor tag. Inside the anchor tag, we want to see if the scroll position is greater than 100. If it's greater than 100, basically means the user has scrolled it a bit. We want to add a new class name active to it. So this is a conditional rendering of the class name, which enables the CSS to pop up the back to top button. Otherwise, it's always hidden. All right. Another thing to concern about is how do we move things back to top. We write a new function called back to top function, which is an arrow function. So when the user on-click events, it will trigger this function. This function will take the user back to 0, 0 position of the window, which is the right top. Okay, so that's how we handle things. And then last but not least is to give you the CSS code for this back to top button. Don't underestimate these things, even though it's pretty small, but it takes quite a bit of design. You have to make sure the position is fixed. Give a bit of a certain width and height of 40 pixels, and also the background color of a theme color, and also you want to control the hover effects of it. This is the key thing. When it's on active class, it's visible. Otherwise, it's hidden, right? That's how we handle the visible and hidden of this back to top button. All right. So once you've done that, we're just going back to our app.js, and we're gonna import this back to top button over here, and then you just double check on your browser, scroll down, notice the bottom corner over here, the bottom right corner. I start to scroll down. See, when I scroll down a bit, this thing show up. Scroll down even further, that thing stay. As soon as I press it, it'll take the page back to the top, and that button disappear. All right. So now we add that back to top button successfully inside the React.js. Because we have enabled the smooth scroll in the CSS over here, scroll behavior smooth. If you are using Google Chrome or some modern Internet Explorer, you should have this thing set up in the browser, and you will see the smooth scrolling. But if you're using the traditional old Windows Explorer or the Internet Explorer, you probably don't have these effects moving on smoothly, depending on which browser you use, right? I'm using Google Chrome. It should be working all okay. It also works on Firefox, I think. So other browsers really depends. But so far, we're having a really, really decent design of the dashboard. And beautifully, if I turn on the mobile design, just give a bit of a refresh, you will see this thing looks pretty nice straight away on the mobile. That's the beauty when you're using the Bootstrap template. You don't have to concern about the Bootstrap, the mobile design again. Everything is shrinked and works responsively for you already when you turn it on. Okay, the sidebar is working, all of this drop-down menu is working, this thing working as well. So everything is working, it's all cool on the mobile view, including the back to top button. Beautiful. All right, we have pretty much finalized this project of the entire dashboard. In this project, we have learned how to build a dynamic dashboard using the different data from our backend URL. These are all dynamic. And also we have learned quite a bit of CSS tricks, and also how to use the third-party libraries to build charts, how to build the tables, how to make a responsive design, how to make an animated sidebar menu, everything. All right. Hopefully you enjoy this course, and if you do like my video, please subscribe my channel, share it, like it, talk with your friend, and if you do have any questions, please leave a comment down below. I'll take my time to answer that. I'm more than happy to answer your questions. Thank you all for watching. I will see you in the next video to show you more creative project. Bye bye.